Afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming along. For all of you here today and everybody online as well, welcome to the next Data Lab Community Meetup. And it's a subject close to my heart, which is geospatial. Actually, are there any geographers in the room or any geospatial scientists? Hey, excellent, excellent. There's always geographers wherever you go. So welcome all. So just to say, there are no fire drills planned today. So if the alarm does sound, number one, don't panic, but number two, just basically head to the main entrance. So we've got two presentations today, and obviously geospatial and geography and all related subjects are so huge and broad. Everything happens somewhere, does it not? So in my own case, my company Resordinate, we map and analyse what happens to commercial and industrial waste. So the geography is kind of important for us in terms of actually really seeing what happens to all that material. But we've got two very different sort of applications going to be kind of talked about today, and more of that in a second. So the format of the event, each of our speakers will stand up, do about 20-minute presentation, and after each presentation, we'll open up for questions. Now, obviously, this event is part of the Data Lab Communities kind of series, so I'm sure many of you are already members, but if you're not, please do sign up. Either use the QR code or obviously go onto the website. So there's a whole series of events that Stephen and the team are running throughout the year. So without further ado, we'll move on to our first speaker, Mark. And Mark is the founder of Marked, believe it or not. No pun intended. So what Marked is, it's sort of developing a wayfinding system that uses geospatial data to identify safer cycling routes within cities and towns. Mark, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Oh, the clicker, that would help. I guess my first ask today is if anybody can come up with a better name for our project/product by the end, I would really appreciate it. I called it Marked at first, not knowing I would have to spend the next 3 years of my life looking at my own name. But anyways, so yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm usually only given 3 or sometimes I push 5 minutes to talk. So yeah, thank you, Stephen, for giving me 20 minutes to talk about a subject I'm really passionate about. And hopefully I don't bore you too much on the way, but we'll see how it goes. So yeah, my background, I'm not a geographer. I'm a civil engineer originally. I studied at Heriot-Watt University, and I've got a nod at the back as well. Very good. Don't know if it's a fellow Heriot-Watt. But I always say I went to university thinking, I was going to build like skyscrapers and bridges. But it wasn't until fourth year of uni when a guy called Andy Mulholland came in, who was the Sustrans lead at the time, and he came in and gave a presentation on sustainable transport and bikes. And yeah, that really was what sparked me. And he kind of explained that bikes weren't just a weekend hobby that I used to see my dad getting all the Lycra and his friends, and I was a wee bit scared of them. But actually cycling could really transform cities, it could transform communities. In terms of economics, more money staying in the local economy, less money spent on infrastructure. Environmentally, we know, trying to switch away from your cars to your green form of transport. But I guess the other bits I was really interested in was socially. That community kind of feeling, like actually being able to see each other eye to eye instead of a city full of cars. So yeah, after this presentation, I became obsessed with cycling. I loved cycling. I loved that it was better for my belly, better for the planet, and it also made me not go broke while as a student here in Edinburgh as well. More money to spend at Hive down the road. But yeah, it totally changed my perspective on the city as well, I'd say. I used to take the bus out to Heriot-Watt, and I never really knew any of the towns or the areas in between where I lived in the city centre. But when I started cycling out, I started on the kind of canal path, and I would see the tenements along the way and be like, oh, like I would maybe like to live here one day if I'd done all right for myself. And you kind of see the different parts of the city, and then I'd end up in Wester Hailes towards the outskirts of the city, and I was scared I was going to get pushed into the water on my bike, but I don't know, it let me see the city in a different way, and it really woke me up to different parts of society and how I've seen the world, really. And then after university, I was really lucky to go and work with Jacobs Engineering in Glasgow. And I loved my job as well, which was designing cycle infrastructure and city planning. But I guess the bit that really killed me inside was when either family members or friends would come up to me and they would say, oh, I want to start cycling, I want to start using this infrastructure that the cities are spending millions on, but they don't feel confident enough to do so. They feel terrified that if they jump on their bike, they might end up on a busy road with heavy traffic. And I guess that's the problem we're trying to solve with Marked. So we work with local authorities and cities to map out their safe cycling network and then promote this on the street. So we create these subway-style maps that clearly show where the safe cycling network is. So we only show the roads relevant to the users. And then the idea is, how do you then promote that on the street in a really cheap, cost-effective way? So I have these kind of color-coded wayfinding system. So you would plan the journey on your phone. Say you want to go from Glasgow Queen Street and you're going to Kelvin Bridge. It would be like, right, take the orange line for 4 stops eastbound, say, and then go yellow line 1 stop. I don't know, I was obsessed with the subway when I was at uni. I just thought, like, as someone with no long-term memory, I don't know if it was long-term or short-term memory, I forgot. It's quite on topic. But yeah, someone with terrible memory, I loved the subway in London and getting around. So could we bring that kind of simplicity of easy directions on your phone, put it away, and then just follow the on-street color-coded wayfinding? And yeah, our overall goal was, or what we believe would be key to creating a sustainable city is, one, you need to show people that safe cycle routes do exist. And then the second one is you have to make that user journey as simple as possible. So I thought today I was going to describe more of what we do through a recent project we've done with Department for Transport over the last 6 months. Sorry, I always go on little side stories, but we were lucky enough to go to the Smart City conference last year, and we had a wee stand and people were coming up to talk to us, and one guy came up and he said, this is really dumb tech. And I didn't know, I was a wee bit taken aback at first, but actually the more he explained it, it was one of the best compliments I got, because that was kind of my ask today was, I guess we're doing AI and we're here. I imagine there's a lot of really clever people in the room. So what we try to do is behind the scenes, we try and make it as clever as possible, use as much of the data as possible. But the front end, we want it to be really simple. We want it to be dumb because cycling's my job and I'm passionate about it, but I need to make a choice every day when I walk by the car. But if you want it to become the norm, people just need to not think about it. They need to just go. So that's kind of my ask. All the clever people in the room, please take notes, grill us as much as possible. We want to make this as good as possible. But for the dumb people in the room as well, there's a space for you. This is what I like to hear when I'm sitting in the audience. So yeah, the first part was we went out to, how do you actually create these maps? So I don't know if anybody's ever had a project or a business, like you start off with this overall vision. So yeah, the first part is like, how do we create the maps? We were really lucky to go out to, I don't know if anybody can name where this is. Oh, we've got one. Where? Do you know whereabouts in Portugal? What? It's Gaia, yeah. I learned that when I was over there. So Porto is above the river, Gaia is below the river. But we worked with the Gaia municipality, and their problem was really they had it's not as much in the Portuguese culture, walking and cycling. Only 10% of people in Porto, and Gaia, walked or cycled to get about. And really they had a lack of active travel data. They didn't know where their safest routes were. So we really wanted to understand their infrastructure and opportunities, and we also thought this was the best way to kind of create our maps. So I need to get good at doing the two at the same time. There we go. So yeah, first off, what we done was we combined the existing data they had from like open source formats, so OSM. Oh, I can see the map here. That's better. OSM and their city master plans. So the open source data, that was good because it was like formatted in a way that could be used for different routing engines and bits like this. But really, I think the interesting bit coming from a more transport planning or geography background was all of their master plans were in GIS data. So this was just lines on a map. So if you can imagine, like, I like to think it as like, you know, your A to Z streets that you used to have in the back of the car. Like, you can follow it on a map, but if you're going to do like, if you want to do really good analysis, you need to have it in a way that like talks to the machine. So yeah, our first one was to combine the existing online data and city master plans. So we then went and done data collection workshops with the citizens, with the local citizens and cycling associations. And our real goal here was, one, like we had this online data, the master plans, but I think like as a cyclist, and the way I learned to cycle was like I would talk to my dad and I'd be like, right, how do I get from here to here? And he'd tell me a wee cycling route. And it's that kind of hidden gems or that local knowledge of them. Yeah, it's easy to see a big protected cycle lane, but sometimes there's lovely like low traffic routes through the neighborhoods that tie them all up. So that was really our goal there. So once we had all that data, we combined it together. And probably a key bit that I might have missed out, but when I worked as a transport planner, I was really lucky to work on a project called Cycling by Design. So it was the infrastructure manual that Transport Scotland brought out in 2021. That was it's the most up-to-date. Any designer in Scotland designing cycle paths, they use this manual to design it. And one of the core parts they put in it is the goal is to have cycle networks that are about 800 meters in density. So like 800 meters the way we've rolled it out there. And I find this quite interesting because we've kind of went from an evolution of like 2010s of like starting to build really good cycle corridors. So like in Glasgow, we've got the South City Way. I should know more. Oh, you've got the Edinburgh ones from like Murrayfield Park and in. But to really get to that kind of Dutch level or Danish level, you have to start having like a network where it's not just connecting outer towns to the centre, but actually you can get anywhere in the city without mixing for transport. So that's why it was key for us to put this 800-metre grid and see if we could fill it as much as possible. And then what we'd done after that was to really validate this data. We strapped 360 GoPro cameras to our head, and we cycled the full network. And this was, I don't know, it was quite a huge space as well. And the real key things for that was, instead of taking this kind of like other routing engines where they're taking all the open data and trying to route you on every street in the city, because we take this network approach, we're able to collect really granular data. Like if we tried to collect this kind of level of data for every street in the city, we'd be there for like a year. But we managed to do this over 3 very sweaty days. Like there was e-bikes involved, but it was good going. It was good going. And then we also rated every segment against the national design standards. So we've done it for the Portuguese ones, and we've done it for the Scottish ones as well. And this was really, sorry, I went back one. Yeah, like I said, to understand their infrastructure, understand where there's good infrastructure, and not just good infrastructure, but potentially really good infrastructure, and then understand where the gaps are as well. And this will make a bit more sense in the future, but this is the street that gets me quite excited. It looks really boring, but actually this is graded really high cycle infrastructure. Like there's no through traffic for cars, the cyclists can go through. And it comes back to that point earlier about can you do really like low tech stuff to bring this up? So we use just these orange ribbons to mark this as a route so the cyclists can easily follow them. But if you think about the cost of that compared to if you had to build a full protected cycle lane and all the junctions on the next street, there's something really interesting about promoting these hidden gems. So yes, that moves us on. Oh, can't remember here, but created a clear representation of the cycle network using the subway style map. So yeah, we created this clear map for the end users, but the key thing as well was formatting this data in a way that it wasn't just GIS, but it was machine readable. So the next part is you've got that data, you've got that nice map, but how do you make people aware of it, and how do you make the infrastructure easy to use? I've no idea what time I'm at as well, so I'll check it after each bit.
7 minutes left.
7 minutes left, right, let's go. So how do you promote that on the street to the end users? And cycle wayfinding is quite interesting because I guess on one hand, when you're walking, you could follow your phone and you could stop at a totem. So you could follow your phone, sorry, or you could stop at a map and you can read it. Whereas when you're in your car, you can follow the sat nav. That's kind of become the standard way. Or you've got actually quite good signs. You know, if you're along the motorway, they're very simplistic. You can see them at speed. We kind of thought there was a gap for cycling that a lot of it's phone-based, or it's the pedestrian signage in the street. It's really small. So we thought, can we bring these kind of intuitive but not intrusive, really low-cost wayfinding solutions? So that's what we've done. We designed a cycle-specific wayfinding system. And yeah, like I was saying, I don't know if I've got it here. I need to remember all the design principles off the top of my head now. Right, here we go. Simple and safe, so they were all meant to be simple. The second one was trying to design for people new to the city and for people new to cycling. So it's that kind of idea of the London subway. So many people come to London, tourists every year, and they use the subway. They don't speak the language, but they can pick it up. And then the other bit is people new to cycling. Can we give them confidence before they jump on the bike that they're going to be on these protected routes? And then the last one is trying to think sustainability or long term. Like no IoT gimmicks in there. This stuff needs to stay up for like 15 years. And actually, sorry, that goes on to the last bit, is can it be movable as well? Like I was saying, that orange ribbon was on one route, but what if we do develop the cycle route next to it? Can that be moved onto the next? So these were all the design principles we were playing with when we looked to test it. So we conducted 2 tests with over 20 participants, cycled the routes around Glasgow Green. And I don't know, this was a terrifying bit of the project because, as you can hopefully tell, I'm quite passionate about it. And I worked on it for about 3 years before this, and I was like, oh, of course, it'll be easier to follow colours to get around cycling. But yeah, when you actually go and test your project, will it actually work? I don't know, it was a nervous experience anyway. So we had them in Glasgow Green, and they had to follow different routes and nodes to get around. And yeah, they would have these kind of either ribbons or junction signs. And the best one I can describe was there was an Irish woman, I don't know if I'll say her name, I'll call her Sharon, so just in case she's watching. But she came to do the test, and we'd done one that was focused on digital and one that was on physical. So we had the phone out in front of them, and it was a classic, like, it would give you the directions as you went, like Google Maps, like turn left, turn right. Or the participants got the choice of changing screen, and they had this kind of like load up bar. So like it would be like if you were on the orange line, it would load up. Anyway, Karen does the first route, and she comes back and we ask her, oh, like how was it? And she was like, it was all right, it was all right. And we're like, oh, did you use the load up bar? And she was like, no, it was, she said a bad word, but she said it was useless. And I think she actually said after that, she was like, I felt quite bad when I came back. And the whole second time, she decided just to use the load up bar. So as she was cycling down, she would see like the red ribbon, and it would load. And when she got to a node, it would tell her to like change onto the orange. But as I was cycling behind her, like I could see she was looking, but her head was up the whole time. Like she was scanning the environment. So I don't know if you're used to cycling, like it's horrible having your head down and going around the junction. But she came back and she kind of said like, that was, I don't know, it was like, she said it was like augmented reality, but for real life. And it really, I don't know, it reaffirmed to me that like, it could work. I don't know, you work on a project for so long, and then it was a really cool day. So the final bit I'll go into is then how do we share that data? So we never intended to be an app in ourselves. Like, it's always sustainable mobility. How can you be alongside public transport, trains, buses? So I don't know if anybody knows, it's called the General Transit Specification Feed. It's the way that, say, ScotRail, Lothian buses, they format their data. So, on Google Maps, you can always see the updated timetable. I used to always think like, oh, Google Maps is scraping that data from somewhere. But it's actually all the providers just formatting the data in one way and sending it to, say, Google, which is really powerful. But for cycling, this is the current Google Maps data structure, or well, it's the data behind it, but it's also how they display their data. So I don't know if anybody is half and half about getting on the bike, but I don't know if I was to show this to my mum, I don't think it would inspire her confidence that she'd be on a safe route, or I don't know if she'd quite understand it. So what we done with the Department for Transport was we created this data flow and specification for integration into third-party applications. So really what we're doing now is we're taking local transport plans, so like how does Edinburgh Council, how does Glasgow Council want people to interact with their city? And then we're pushing to have this standardized data specification. So like the GTFS, Google Maps can pick it up. And there's also really interesting bits that can be done there in terms of the analysis you can do off the back of it. If all the data in the UK is the same, we can do really interesting analysis. So yeah, that's how it could look after if we kind of structure the data in the right way, the people in the end. So yeah, I'll kind of wrap up there. And like I said, the two sides of the story, like I would like you to be as rough as possible, like the smart people in the room, but also calling out for you kind of more, I don't know if I want to call you. yeah. Yes, it's taking it on. Yep, and so I'll say that last bit as well is, again, we think if cycling is going to become like a key form of transport, one, people have to know there's safe routes out there, and two, that journey has to be as simple as possible. So that's hopefully what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Mark. That was very remarkable. Really good. So we've got plenty of time for questions. So if you do have a question, just raise your hand and I'll bring the mic over because we need the online audience can hear what you're saying. So any questions? Right. Yes, sir.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, right. Sorry. Go on. Go for it.
Hello, that's very interesting, many thanks. I was wondering if, sort of maybe two questions really, but what sort of back-end data processes, etc., did you use? And maybe the simpler question is, do you think use of a data standard, GTSF, is critical to what you're doing?
It's critical to what we're doing. I'll start with the second one first. Yeah, it's key to what we're doing because we need to share it. We want to share it with other applications. But I think it's wider, it's critical to active travel in general. I think like the cities, like the last part, we want to kind of become a vendor to help do this, but we don't want this to be our active travel data specification. We just want the general industry to specialize in it. And then the front end, it's mostly just now we take OSM data and then we use Postgres and PostSQL and do routing queries off the back of that. But I think there's another two ways to do it as well. Valhalla, I don't know if that's the right one, but there's also an industry standard to do it as well, a different way. But good.
Thank you. Right, a question from the front.
That was really cool. Thank you. I have a number of probably like just small questions. So you talk about this 800-meter cycling density.
Yeah.
I'd love to know a bit more what that means. Then I was also wondering, it sounds not entirely dissimilar to some of the mapping that, for instance, City Mapper does in London with the quiet ways and safe routes.
Yeah.
Because you have this like different options, right? Where you have like fast route, regular, and quiet ways slash. I don't know if that's but it sounds like some of the same idea without the signage, which is a big part, obviously. Also, you said that all the providers, council, transport, pre-package and share their data.
All the
who's
transport,
that?
like, how do you call them again? Like bus companies. Bus companies, train companies, they already do it just now for public transport. So public transport is really common to do, to like share what happens in your city with
Right.
third-party providers.
Okay, that's what you meant to say. And then this is like a final thing. I was wondering to what extent building this kind of network for facilitating cycling includes things like mapping road quality.
Oh, yeah.
And well, definitely in Scotland, I feel like it's a massive thing that sometimes these like more side roads, one of the reasons not to take them, I cycle all the time. One of the reasons I don't take side roads is because there's insane potholes in them, or they're often cobblestones.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering how that fits into it.
So I think I can answer. So I can answer the first one about the 800 meters and the pothole kind of one at the same time. So a key thing for us was not to be the experts. So everything we do comes from this document called Cycling by Design, which is the one that shows or directs engineers on how to create cycle infrastructure. So the 800 meters, that's like the lowest level of service for a grid. But it just kind of means that, in a simple terms, like 800 meters is like you should be able to get to and from the network with to and from the safe network within 5 minutes. Like you might need to walk the last 5 minutes of your journey, but you should be able to, once you're on there, it has a density of like 800 meters. And then the second one that you were saying against the potholes is, I think that's where the key part is like the analysis. So like we have safety, which is, it's mostly, are you mixed with traffic? Is it heavy traffic, fast traffic? But the other ones Cycling by Design has is like coherence, directness, and then comfort would be potholes. So I think it's really like, it's collecting this data and showing cities like, these are the easy wins, like really understanding your network on that granular level. And look, if you actually repair this road here, or you put in a modal filter to stop traffic, that's where we can get to a really high quality overall network. And then the other one was City Mapper. I think probably similar, like, and we're hopefully talking to City Mapper on Wednesday. But ours is all about, we work on that side with the city, like formatting the data and saying like, right, what you're putting on the ground in terms of like infrastructure, we're really trying to promote that. Whereas City Mapper's on that, they're taking all their data from open data and doing the quiet ways. And like there is some stuff on the ground, but we want the city to decide how people, or to point people how they want them to use their city instead of kind of like routing engines.
Yeah, you're much more linked earlier on with policymakers.
Yeah, with the people who are planning it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very good. Another question? Yeah, yes, sir. Hang on.
Cheers.
Hi, I'm kind of curious because obviously one of the main things you wanted was to like have like a full, it looks like you had like a full complete network going everywhere. Do you ever find yourself having to like compromise that with like the quality of the roads where you're just kind of like, some places you're spoiled for choice and some places it's like, we've got to put the route somewhere. So.
Yeah, definitely. Like you can see like on these maps, like, you know, where the two lines join? Like that's where we've had to, so we either rate them as like, a 3, a 2, or a 1. But sometimes, we wouldn't, like we cycled with a GoPro some places that we would never point people to cycle. So we like then ended up having to, the map had like huge holes in the middle. But that's like where the analysis comes in, and you go to the city and you say, actually there's a real missing link here. Like if you improve this part, like this could really open up the rest of the network.
Okay, Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Right, I think we've got time for a couple more. Was there one more from the room? Yes, there we go. And then we've got one online, I think. So,
oh no.
Right, there we go.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for sharing. I'm really interested in that. I was wondering, from my understanding, you have defined the different roads, the cycling roads, like based on assessment. Like you give the different grading of the street quality, right? I was curious how you weight it, like based on different aspects from the, for example, the environment, the traffic, the driveless, right? The safety. How you get the specific weighted? Is that from your subjective feeling or from all different members in your group, or do you have any kind of feedback from the users?
Yeah. No feedback from the users just now. So it's designed for the city planners. We had an interest. We might be able to get feedback from the users in the future, which would be really cool. But for now, it's all to do with the city planner and this holy grail document I'm talking about, cycling by design. And some things like safety, there's no subjectivity to it. It's like, is cycle infrastructure present, like a protected cycle lane? No. What's the speed of the roads? And then that'll define, and what's the volume of traffic on the road? That'll define the safety level. But some other ones, like attractiveness, like it has attributes like level of green space, and we can put in like an initial level based on like OSM or open street points. But that's where it's really interesting if the planner actually goes through and decides, is that grading correct or not correct? So it's a mix of, yeah, solid data points and then subjectivity from the designer or the planner. And then, like you say, hopefully in the future, you can kind of do that crowdsourcing, like working with the community to say, oh, actually, this is, yeah, we need to do something about this part. Like, it's not got the best comfort in the world, or, yeah.
So as we can see on the screen, there's like 6 index, and are they equal?
What was it, sorry?
Are these
Oh,
6?
no,
Yeah.
sorry, actually, yeah, that's a good point. So actually, the only one that we take into account for our maps is safety. So it's solid line for really high level of safety, and it's dashed line for mixed with some traffic. Like it's, I can't remember the exact, it falls into a certain rating category, but what we think about in our head is like, solid line is like, you'd be fine with your friend coming, you know, from out of town, you would take, it's not comfortable cycling. But the next dashed line is like, your friend comes, you would feel comfortable cycling down it if you're a usual cyclist, but you wouldn't take, say, a 12-year-old kid down it. But so safety is the only one that actually goes to the end user. The other ones are for the local authority. Sorry.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Right, one more question from our online audience, delivered by Stephen.
Thank you. So Ian Curry, who's online, is asking, you've mentioned a couple of times that the GIS data needs to be machine readable.
Yeah.
Could you explain that in a little bit more detail, please?
Yeah. I think it's so interesting because I guess my industry, or geographers as well will know this, is like, back in the day it was all, what was it called? You just draw it on a map. Like you just pen and paper, draw it on a map. And then we've evolved to what we call GIS, so you can put the map behind it and you can have, you can draw the lines on there. But so, you know, like when you're using Google Maps and you're going, right, I want to go from London to, say, Edinburgh. What's the quickest route? The machine needs to count up, like what's all the costs behind them. So what's the best way to say that? Yeah. It's like instead of it just being graphical, every line has to have, it has to have a cost. That's how it works. And it has to have like a defined start point and end point, which connects to other lines. And all of that can be added up. So you can do, I don't know if that makes sense. Tell me, have I explained that kind of correctly, or?
I don't know if I'm...
You weren't even listening to my answer. It's okay.
Clarify what you mean by cost. I think it might all this make sense.
A cost is, cost could be set to anything. So usually it's set to distance. But in terms of like navigation apps, it's like you can do distance times gradient, and then that'll get, say, a certain cost. Oh, that's how you explain it, sorry. Is the routing engine costs up all the possible different routes, and then whatever comes back with the lowest cost is the one it chooses. So like if you imagine all of these had different lengths in that, if we were going to do it manually before, we'd have to sit there with a calculator or an Excel spreadsheet. Now the computer can do it, yeah, straight away. So it's a kind of different level of analysis, and like that's what you need to do if you're routing in a city. You can't expect people to boop, boop. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Mark. That was great. I think a round of applause again for Mark. That was a really excellent presentation. I'm obviously not a proper geographer because I don't have coloured pencils in my top pocket, and I'm not carrying some tracing paper. So there you go. Right, so next presentation is from Callan and Marion, and they're from the Universities of Edinburgh and St Andrews. And it's a really interesting project. It's called the Workers' Observatory. And they're looking to understand the impact of geospatial data tracking on the working conditions of workers in the gig economy. So, Marion and Callum, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm Marion. We both work with the Workers' Observatory. This project that we're talking about today has been ongoing. The Workers' Observatory has been ongoing for a couple of years. This is a process that was started about September last year, give or take. And today it's a bigger project about working conditions and collective organising of food delivery platform riders in Edinburgh in particular, with now extensions in Dundee and Glasgow. And today we're going to focus more on the geospatial elements of that. So this will be the structure. We'll go a bit quickly on certain aspects. But to give a bit of background, so can I get a show of hands for how many people in the room use Deliveroo or Uber Eats, any kind of apps to get food to your home or your workplace? Can you raise your hand if you use it, even like intermittently, like once in the last 6 months or whatever? Okay, so most people in this room would be using what we call sort of like digital labor platforms for food delivery. Most of that is being carried out on the ground by platform workers, riders, mainly riders in Edinburgh. It would be mainly people on bikes, e-bikes, or standard bikes. And I just want to say a few words about how these apps develop, because they've become by now a big face of cycling in cities, right? But they follow a sort of process. So an app like Deliveroo being the most famous of those apps, their development model is that they move into a new city like Edinburgh, and they initially they don't have a lot of data in that city. They might have the publicly accessible data, so they start with that. But they don't have particularly granular data, and they need to build like a user base or a client, restaurant base, worker base. For a couple of years, the working conditions are quite good. The wages are pretty decent. They're quite predictable. You got quite a clear connection between the distance for a ride and the pay that you get. During that phase, the company sort of stores and aggregate data on the urban grid, how long it takes to go from A to B, and it builds its base of users. Then it reaches a moment that you could call data dominance, or sort of like market dominance, whichever you want to call it, where a lot of restaurants have become reliant on a particular app, one or two, usually Deliveroo, Uber Eats here, those would be the dominant ones. And the workers, a bunch of workers have become reliant on those apps, right? At that point, the company switch to algorithmic pricing, so what we call dynamic pricing, which is when instead of having a direct connection between if you cover a particular, proportional like distance to pay kind of link, it's a reverse auction system. So based on the data that they've aggregated, they can predict what is the lowest pay that people are likely to accept for a ride, and then they give offers under that initially, and they rely on people rejecting those offers until the point where then they get accepted. So dynamic pricing across the board, it's now used in food delivery, it's used in Uber. Most of this kind of on-demand platform work uses dynamic pricing at the point when they get to that kind of point where they've built enough dependency in the market and amongst workers that they can. It has the immediate effect of undercutting wages very effectively for the vast majority of workers. So this is the point that we've reached in Edinburgh about 3 years ago. Most riders identify as such, where like people who have been working for a couple of years, they're like 5 years ago, it was quite a good job to do as like a side gig, and now it's very hard to survive on this kind of work. And you can see this is a sort of like teaser on some of the work that we've done with riders, because it's based on a survey that was conducted by riders, which maps very simply the level of dependency on certain apps. So this is workers' data, and you have like, nearly 90% of them use Deliveroo. Not exclusively, a lot of workers would use multiple apps, but when you get to that level, obviously Deliveroo can do sort of whatever it wants. So that's the kind of background. In terms of data, what that means in how workers relate to apps and how obviously most of us are workers, so how we as society, as people might relate to apps, we kind of need to understand the asymmetries that this kind of relationship involves. One obvious aspect is that apps have all the data, geospatial and wage data, etc. And the workers have none. It's often very difficult to even have access to your own individual data, never mind the aggregate data. There's the effect of algorithmic kind of black box, especially once you switch to dynamic pricing, where it's very difficult to compare, to make arguments around equity, to like predict how much you might earn. There's the problem that the data that the platforms collect isn't necessarily the one that the workers need the most, or that might be most important for riders. And this is when this connects a little bit to what Mark was talking about, because for instance, data that is super critical for workers might be data on accidents, which, as we'll see, a lot of riders get into. It's quite a dangerous job. But that isn't collected by the platform. It's not even factored by the platform in terms of calculating how long you should take from one point to the next. And finally, this fact that apps just will not share data with workers or with researchers. This is a general thing. It doesn't matter if you're in a public university, if you're very famous, not famous, the apps, digital labor platforms do not share data with anybody. The only way to get data is there's a couple of formal legal avenues, like data access requests, that means that workers can demand to have access to their individual data. And then some unions like IWGB's and Workers Info Exchange have then put a lot of work into aggregating that data to get a sense of how many rides, etc. And these are the ways that this impact of dynamic pricing has been documented. But that is extremely complicated. And it doesn't address a bigger question, which is missing data the problem here when we think about how the working conditions of riders in cities like Edinburgh and how they occupy the space?
Yeah, so I suppose that's a bit of an overview of the situation from the kind of technical side of things. Our concern, and my background as a union organizer, are how do workers engage with what they experience and know and make sense of that knowledge in ways that can be useful data for them and that can help them to interpret the kinds of data that is being used to control them. And so that system of engaging people in thinking through the systems of data processing that are controlling and managing their work invites people who don't necessarily have insight or experience with working with data to consider what it is to be controlled by data in that way, and to sort of come to understand the ways, for instance, in which their movement around the city is being driven by the data that they effectively are generating through their work that's then being processed and fed back to them as a series of commands. And one of the ways that we've found it most useful to introduce people to thinking through that process is through what we call mapping. Now, mapping can be a range of things that are more or less geographical. It can be mapping things like the ways in which people seek support if they get into trouble. But sometimes a simple mapping of figuring out where you're moving through the city helps people to realize ways, as Marion said, that only some of the data that matters to them as workers is being gathered by the companies. So for instance, blockages in roads, hazardous routes, these are all obviously things that are extremely important for workers to see, but they're also important in a wider sense, which is building up a case. So there's general awareness and knowledge amongst workers that the drivers and data that control them in many cases make life unsafe, in many cases unnecessarily, as a result of the kind of data that's being gathered. There is a bigger project here that we are intervening in, which is about considering how and through which processes we can ensure that the data that is driving this kind of industry is data that is both transparent, but is also going to increase and improve the likelihood of safety, is going to enable the capacity to bargain over these kind of questions of health and safety and pay that are fundamentals in any labour process. So in a nutshell, I'm just trying to give you a flavour of the ways in which, through inviting people to explore questions of data, we've found it to be quite a fruitful way for including workers who are data workers in a matter of what they're doing, producing data that is then incorporated into the system of control, but who obviously aren't necessarily working with data in a day-to-day sense. So just a sense of what one of the Workers' Observatory initiatives. And as I say, that is about collecting data, it's about validating experience, it's about transforming experiences into the language of data which the universities and the industry speak in, quite often to the exclusion of those affected. So there's a kind of process here of empowerment from below that we've been pioneering in the last couple of years. And this very much does happen on the streets. So it happens through encounters and figuring out where it is that people move, but also crucially, where do people gather? One of the functions of the apps is to disperse people so that they aren't working or even standing in the same place. There are incentives against the capacity to collectivize and connect and being baked into the systems. Obviously, it's in the advantage of companies for workers not to speak to one another. And it's another way in which people realize that if they all come together in one place, and we did an exercise where everybody opened the app at the same time, you suddenly see who's being offered different things and why. You're able to compare that to your experience if you were to log on in different bits of the cities. So again, a whole series of exercises. We don't have time to go into the granular stuff, but hopefully you can see how that geospatial data is absolutely core to those kind of experiments that are enabling workers to understand a bit more the ways in which they're being controlled.
I'm gonna give you some of the results from some of those experiments that are gonna be like a bit practical, like this is what's happening with workers in a place like Edinburgh, in different parts of Edinburgh, and this is how they understand, like practically, how is this geospatial data used and what it what it means for you as a worker, as a rider. So in terms of geo-tracking, some things that maybe if you've ever done delivery work, you know this already. If not, you might have no idea. If you're doing delivery work, you need to have your GPS on, like your location service on. The app tracks your movement constantly. And if you slow down, or if you take a detour that the app hasn't anticipated, you get threatening messaging. Worker talk about this and about the pressure to not slow down and to not make detours at all in order to make ends meet. So this becomes like very important and very critical, considering the wage pressure and the fact that it's actually really, like, you need to make a lot of deliveries all the time in order to be able to live off this, which most of the workers that have been involved in this project are dependent on these apps. It's their main source of income. The AI disciplining element of this is on the back of this granular data that Deliveroo, for instance, has aggregated over a period of time. They get to a point where they have live data that is much more, much finer and much more up to date than even like Google Maps, right? Because it's based on constant crisscrossing, live crisscrossing of workers across the city. It's on the back of that they send. That they're like, you've taken a detour, you've slowed down in an area where you shouldn't slow down, etc. Accounts get deactivated, that's the threat, but it also happens very regularly. no appeal is possible. Workers talked about losing their account without any explanation, just on some sort of like general suggestion that they had slowed down or had not made delivery in the expected time, and of sending upwards of 30 emails to like beg for their account to be reinstated without ever getting an answer. We also mapped with workers the level of risk, and this was quite shocking, right? Because this process is like a co-design of research. So we're not coming in with a survey, a set of survey questions. We come in with like issue mapping tools, where we're like, what do you think are issues here? What in your work? Where do you think these issues are? This is the sort of word cloud that you saw earlier. And then we do different sorts of group work to help workers turn those into survey questions, and then turn the survey into a method and a reason to go to other workers and to meet other workers and talk about working conditions, right? And so one of the things that came up was accidents, at which point we had the whole discussion with riders about what is an accident, what level of accident should we ask people? So we landed on, have you been in an accident in the last 6 months where you were at least thrown off your bike, where you had, and 30% of the riders said, yes, in the last 6 months, I've at least been thrown off my bike. And a lot more had further, obviously lots of scare, lots of bumping into things. One important thing here, which is I think important to researchers in general, is that there were plenty of things about how to relate to this geospatial data and tracking that we hadn't anticipated. So for instance, when we mapped issues, an issue that workers brought up immediately was road work. And I remember being in the room and being like, yes, this is obviously annoying if you're a cyclist or a rider, but also road work needs to happen. This isn't an organizing thing that, it's not really actionable. We can't object to road work. And it's only afterwards when they explained, they were like, no, you don't understand. It's because the app doesn't factor in road work. And so when there's road work and it's not yet been factored in by the app, it counts as a detour, which means you could lose your account. And so it's in this interaction between, and that's something to think about, or that I think we think about a lot as researchers, with the level of knowledge that workers have about how the app work, how their data is being used, and that often should bring a lot of humility, I think, to researchers, because we come in with a lot of expectations about how to understand these things, but they understand them quite a lot better than we do. These are some of the key results. I'm going to try to go very quick because, yeah. This is the degree of reliance. So for most riders in Edinburgh, this is their main job. Nearly half of riders, they work all the time, 40% 7 days a week. They get their vehicles stolen very regularly. And I'll go back to mapping risky areas. These are some of the outputs of the campaign.
So we've focused on the kind of front of the kind of process here. What I'm going to do now is quickly run through some of the activities and outputs of this process to give you a sense of how that process of thinking through with workers generates and validates the kind of process from below. So workers have been making these flyers. I've got them in my bag. I forgot to bring them out to explain to others the value of getting involved in these kind of research action activities. It's obviously resulted in a bit of coverage and awareness of some of these conditions on the ground. And it's also opened the door to city council engagement, because obviously from a planning point of view, these are critical questions, but there needs to be evidence and data to start the process of conversation. So we were in the council with the Deputy Lord Provost the week before last, just raising these issues. So I guess it's the ways in which that kind of data can bring to the surface some of what workers already know, and start opening that question about what function or role local authorities and governments have in regulating platforms that isn't straightforwardly around employment rights, but might relate to the conditions that workers are working under.
I'm going to go over this very quickly. This is just to give you a sense of the research data behind. So we did this whole experiments with the workers, and then we also conducted retrospective interviews with the workers who'd been involved throughout to get a sense of what they had gotten from being involved. I'm going to summarize that very quickly, but fundamentally, the merit of being involved in this kind of data experiment with workers is not so much that workers get a better understanding of the platform, because they understand the platforms really well. They understand how the platform uses spatial data, how the platform uses wage data. They know that the way that algorithms are used, they understand that that's to cut down wages. The main merit of doing this kind of data exercises is to create a sense of collective issue and a sense of possibility around collective advocacy and collective campaign. So, for instance, some of what the workers said they had gotten from being involved in this was a sense of confidence in their experience as workers, that they could push back in particular against restaurants who had terrible practices with workers, and also against platforms, for instance, by refusing add-on orders, like batch orders. This is something we can talk a little bit more about, but maybe in the questions, because I think we're running out of time. It's just to anticipate a point that sometimes when mapping this kind of issue, there is a tendency to anticipate that it might be fixed by tools, and it might be fixed by like mapping differently, and that's quite different from like mapping sort of like safe routes and everything. But there's like a different understanding of safety. So, for instance, in Brazil, some workers got together to create Rebu. They were Uber workers, so Uber Rebu. And the idea was to optimize ride allocation so that the app would map where the rides were being better paid, right? And they would tell you if you go to this area, you might get a better ride. And it also included a risk button, because riders were concerned about assaults, essentially. So that was like worker generated, but it's an individualized understanding of risk. The problem with that is that it gets integrated by the platform. So Uber initially tried to sue and then included a new risk button feature in their app design in Brazil. This feels like a useful example to think about data tools, and what exactly is the missing thing for workers in this context. And maybe sometimes it's technological fixes, but often, and this is maybe the conclusion, what we're observing in our interactions, like in working with riders, is that the really important missing thing for riders in a place like Edinburgh, in a lot of places, is often not data. It's knowledge of what could be possible it's leverage. It's essentially leverage. And there, where what affects worker a lot is the atomized nature of the work, the fact that these work sectors are not unionized at all, the fact that there is no connection to like political groups or connection to broader struggles. And so this is where the Workers' Observatory ended up fitting in this particular part of the labor market that hasn't really been approached by unions, where riders, you really struggle to even get to a point where riders understand their working conditions as like part of a collective, and how they could build and push and demand different kind of working conditions and different uses of their data as a collective. So this is basically the conclusion, but that I just sort of said that. Do you want to? Okay.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. Round of applause, please. I think there's a lot to unpick there, isn't there? I was thinking about Rebu, and I was thinking, reviled. I wonder who that might be. Anyway, we won't go into that. Sorry, it was all right. I was just reversing the name there, but trying to guess who that might be. Okay, so question, Mark.
No, thank you very much for the presentation. Like, I was having like bad flashbacks because I worked as a delivery driver in my final year of uni, and I think the two that you said, like being isolated, like not knowing any of your co-workers, and then you kind of, after a couple of months, you built it up talking to different people. But the second one was being blacklisted. Like the price would come in and you had, I don't know, it's just you see the machine and it goes down and you're like, oh, should I take it? But yeah, some of the situations I had myself in were horrible. So I guess my question is, how can we help as well? You know, like people who are not part of the, I don't know, just the general public. How can we kind of help?
What's happening here is this kind of work tends to be done by people who are relatively, this is generalizing, but relatively new to the city. Not on the whole, there's some people who've been doing it for years. It becomes quite racialized work, both in the sense that there are cohorts of people doing it who are from different parts of the world, but also the way it's perceived generates a sense that enables sometimes politicians to demonize the people who are doing the work and to regard or describe them as causing hazards in the city or as generating a kind of disruption. And the Conservative Party here moved a motion to that effect, describing reckless weaving and trying to characterize workers as being a problem for the city. I think that the core root of the problem is coming from the pressure, obviously, that these apps generate. And it's to a certain extent coming from the fact that we need to do more as a community of people in the city to ensure that people feel part of city life as far as possible. So I guess it's really just saying, you know, everybody who works in the streets, that's their office, treat people like you would, and involve people in that civic process of trying to build power in the city. I mean, there's a whole different question of if you've got data skills, then it'd be great to talk to you about different ways we could incorporate those. But first and foremost, I think it's the political side. I don't know if you've got any data-related ways that you think that.
The question of like mapping, like and the technical, like I'm a social data scientist, so I was more involved in the like data experiment side of things. But we didn't do any formal mapping. We did, like as you said, like pen and paper kind of mapping, but. That came up a bunch of times as like, is that something we should do? And we thought about it I'm trying to think of like more practical kind of, so there's different kinds of mapping that could be potentially useful to workers. Like at some point we're like, should we map law enforcement activities? Because definitely in London, there is, because this population of riders are quite racialized, and they're quite victimized by the police as well, as like with sort of like suspicions that some of them are undocumented, etc. And so in London there was would that be useful to like as a sort of like solidarity feature for people to be able to map where immigration police might be trying to like stop riders. So we had like thoughts around that. The problem is like ultimately it feels like any kind of practical fix around mapping, for instance, mapping risk, etc., misses the main point, which is the wage pressure. Like even this motion that we've mentioned, where that basically attacks riders for saying, oh, they're riding too fast through pedestrian areas. This is very dangerous for everybody. This is a hazard. Like, we could think, oh, how could we create safer routes and everything? But like fundamentally, the reason that they're going very fast is because otherwise they're not going to survive on the kind of wages that they're on. So it feels, I'm always very hesitant to like suggest other things than like a very clear political solidarity focus on these are workers that are intensely exploited, intensely surveilled in part through this harnessing of data. And this is what the message that needs to be pushed by everybody.
Cheers. That was really interesting research and like some really shocking stats in there. I was introduced to this term recently, dark kitchens. You might be able to talk a bit more about this, but my understanding is that the companies like Deliveroo are now kind of using the data that they have on consumers and what food they want to eat to set up these kitchens that don't have any shop fronts. So that's why they're kind of dark kitchens. They just provide food for Deliveroo riders to go and deliver food. I'm just wondering to what extent you're kind of including restaurants and restaurant owners in that kind of ecosystem when you're having these conversations, because potentially, if these dark kitchens are going to be cropping up around the place, that impacts the shape of communities and whether these restaurants will survive, whether people can still go and actually sit in a restaurant to have food. So yeah, just interested in kind of in the inclusion of them. And also you kind of talked about potentially there's some tension between the riders and the restaurants as well, and how that works when they're all kind of being exploited by the same systems, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big subject, and I think the answer from our point of view is quite simply that we're working with workers at this stage, and through that process, workers are forming a voice in the city, and through forming that voice in the city, which is a separate thing from the Observatory, there's a group called Room, which has emerged from this process. They're then able to go to the council, who is willing and offered to broker those conversations with restaurants. So I suppose it's about saying, start from the data and the experience, figure out and give a validation of that knowledge that then enables and empowers workers to have those conversations, rather than as researchers as kind of trying to figure out all the moving parts at this point. So I guess that's a quick way of saying it's absolutely relevant. But exactly what you're describing around the effect on local businesses, the effect on the geography of the cities, is what turns a workers' issue into a civic issue. And I think that informing that process and using data to inform that process is certainly what we've been thinking about doing. Hopefully that helps a bit.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Okay, there's time for one more question. There we go.
Many thanks. That was fascinating and quite sobering. I was wondering, do you think there's any scope for looking at national level collision data such as Stats 19 to see if there's any statistically significant increase in cycling collisions where these operators are prevalent?
So I'm sure there is. I haven't looked at this data. So this is more like police data, or like?
I've used the Stats 19 data quite a bit for a few things, and it has quite granular and specific detail on collisions involving vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists. So, I guess the challenge would be over a period of time, but I guess this model is now quite mature in many ways, so you might see something in there that could be attributed to the industry.
Maybe we could have a conversation about
yeah. That would be useful. It always feels politically kind of charged. So the problem with the data on accidents, and especially when it's police collected data, I haven't used the data you're talking about, so I don't know how it's generated. But often data on accidents is compiled by the police, and in a way, you can build a degree of political consensus around the fact that it's bad that accidents are happening in the city. It can be a little bit tricky when you're concerned about the risk that is then used against riders as evidence that they are dangerous. Do you know what I mean?
I was wondering if you could use it maybe to support a case for regulation and supporting the riders by promoting responsible behaviour on the algorithm users.
Yeah, so I think, absolutely, and I think that can be part of a broader argument. I'm just sort of explaining what it can feel like a little bit, that argument has to be made quite carefully. And this is also a sort of a different approach. Our approach with the Workers' Observatory is that our work with data is a sort of instrument for collective organizing in the gig economy. So the data angle that we take is almost secondary. We do it because we think it's useful for workers to come together and to talk about their working conditions and to develop a voice around it. But if we thought other tools that wouldn't be quantitative worked better, we would do that. So that's why we call it counter data, because it's an approach to working with data where the data itself or the analytical tools is a little bit secondary to the goal of. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And just one closing point is that for me that means that at what stage do you seek data to make a case? And I think that what we've got is the council listening and acknowledging that if you've got, say, a construction company that's taking up streets and scaffolding was falling, you wouldn't blame the worker, you blame the company. There's something wrong in the systems of control and management that are resulting in a hazard to the worker and to the public. And that it's the same here. As long as we know that the council is focused on regulating the companies that are using the data to control workers in hazardous ways, then that gives us confidence to have those kind of conversations to ensure that we're not contributing to the demonization of this, but we're empowering the people affected by it. And at that point, and I think at this stage and any stage, the more data that we can gather, the better.
Thank you very much. That was really powerful stuff. So thanks again to Callan and Marion. So round of applause, please. Okay, so now, as is traditional, we have a kind of open mic session. So if anybody's got any announcements, any events they're running, anything they want to add, anything they want to ask, just say so now. No? No? Okay, well, that was an easy one. Okay, so we'll draw things to a close now. So there's some other events coming up. So I think, Stephen, you're going to flash something up here. So, yeah, so we've got Connected Vehicles coming up on the 18th of June. Where's that? Is that going to be here as well?
That's online.
Oh, it's online. Okay, okay. And next, there we go. Accessibility, cultural heritage mapping. Is that online? That's online as well? Yep. Okay, cool. And the next one. So sustainability. So next month, in fact, is Sustainability Month for the community. So there'll be a whole bunch of events with that kind of theme. So, and I think that's it. I think, Stephen, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Well, so if anybody wants to know any more about Data Lab, about the community, then just sort of check in online. There's all the information's there. And thank you very much for attending both in person and online. Thank you.